I thank you, Mrs. Roosevelt, for your gracious introduction, and I deeply appreciate the honor which you and the Mother's Day Committee of the Golden Rule Foundation have conferred upon me. The honor, of course, belongs to all mothers. As Mrs. Roosevelt has just said, Mother's Day 1940 is tragically different from any other Mother's Day we have known. 1940 may prove the most crucial year in modern history, when half the world is at war. Today, there are untold myriads of mothers in Europe and Asia, as well as in impoverished homes of our own land, who are praying not for flowers, but for flour, not for candies, but for bread, not for greeting cards and telegrams, but for medicine, sympathy, and the necessities of life. I do not know of any way in which we could more appropriately honor our mothers than by doing for war orphans, widowed mothers, and victims of military aggression in other lands that which we would like to have done for our own, if conditions were reversed. Let us all help in this great work. So, May 12, 1940, Mother's Day, a bittersweet day. I am Edith Graham Mayo, wife of my dearest love, Dr. Charles Mayo, who, as you know, we lost just last year. Sister-in-law of Dr. William and Hattie Damon Mayo, mother to 8 children, 2 of them lost in infancy, and grandmother to 22, and 2 others we took in when they needed a home. I would not change a single thing in my long and rich life. But on this day of reflection, and as we confront another dark war that will test the mettle of us all, I want to pause to consider once again how, if we are ever to do great and helpful things in our world, we must all work together across generations toward the common cause. I have been fortunate enough to have been part of the larger Mayo family for the past 51 years. And that includes not only William Worrell Mayo, who started all this, and his ceaselessly courageous wife, Louise Wright Mayo, their sons, Charlie and Will, Henry Plummer, Louis B. Wilson, Harry Harwick, Donald Balfour, E. Starr Judd, Waltman Walters, so many exemplary men, but also many, many women whose dedication and competence have made our clinic the respected organization it is today. Their stories are less familiar, perhaps, but that simply means it is time for these stories to be told. For these are the extraordinary women of the founding generation of Mayo Clinic, who persevered at a time when opportunities for women were more limited. And since, in my many years here, I have known personally nearly all of them, it is my honor to introduce a few of them to you on this special day. And I believe that we could do no better than to begin with my dear friend, Alice McGaw, who will forever after be known as the mother of anesthesia. Well, I thank you, Edith. Thank you. Yes, it's true that my work is, in a very real sense, my family. And for that, I've always been very happy. We are the closest of friends, Edith and I. We went to nursing school together many years ago at Women's Hospital in Chicago. God, Chicago, that booming metropolis. Even then, that could not have been a bigger contrast to our little hometown here on the prairie. And we graduated together. I was lucky enough to be hired by the Mayos, and then when Edith married Dr. Charlie, I replaced her as Mayo anesthetist, and that was the beginning of the career that has sustained me, lo, these many years. So, my story, well, I recall, and not long after I started here, the brothers sent me back to Chicago to learn about microscopes, not for research, but to study tissue samples. I was still quite new in those days. And then, not long after that, they acquired what's called a light microscope from Berlin. Oh my. A magnifying power of 12,000 diameters. Can you imagine? Wild horses couldn't pull me away from that. Or from Mayo. No, my heart was captured. Now, Berlin was also where a new method for administering ether was developed. It was called the open drop method. You probably know all this. But it revolutionized the field. Now, think of this. Some hospitals actually used a method that called for choking and smothering the patient until the medication took effect. Choking and smothering, those are the very terms. Need I say how this frightened the patient? Or how often it led to adverse outcomes? No, for heaven's sake, let us administer ether slowly. Let us talk our patients to sleep with calm, reassuring words. Let us also carefully monitor our patient's pulse and respiration and skin color during surgery to avoid being overwhelmed by unforeseen circumstances. Yes? Surely these protocols are sensible. These are, in fact, the protocols that I have assiduously followed. And I'm delighted to say that in my 15 years as an anesthetist in the Mayo practice, working with over 17,000 patients, we had not a single anesthesia-related death. I am pleased as punch at this. So, no, I'm not a mother in Edith's sense, but oh, I have loved my work as I would my children. And that work has allowed me to travel professionally throughout the U.S. and Europe, and to accompany Doctors Will and Charlie to numerous medical meetings. But the happiest times of my life have been in the surgical suite, sitting at the head of the operating table, carefully monitoring the sleeping patient, in the estimable company of Dr. Will and always Sister Joseph Dempsey, who was Dr. Will's first assistant for so many years. This is my joy. And with that, I hand the baton, or perhaps I should say the scalpel, to Sister Joseph, who I believe has at last managed to find a quiet moment in her day for us. Thank you, Alice, for those kind words, but I protest I was not always Dr. Will's surgical assistant. Now, I assisted him in the operating room for 25 years, and on occasion would, at his request, oversee the ongoing procedure while he turned to talk to the gallery of visitors, of whom there were many. And I confess that during this time, I identified a particular umbilical nodule that is often the only sign of abdominal cancer. It has since been named Sister Joseph's nodule, so perhaps I will have some legacy after all. No, what caused me to step down from my surgical role were the demands of my responsibilities as administrator of St. Mary's Hospital, following on our beloved Mother Alfred, she who had the vision and resolve to begin this endeavor in the first place. But we never seemed to have enough room. In the 90s and into the early years of this century, the Sisters of St. Francis financed expansions on 5 different occasions. We added operating rooms, laboratory space, maternity ward, hundreds of beds, and still the need to care for more patients grew almost every year, even with Mayo patients being treated in 5 other hospitals in Rochester. Our largest construction project was the 7-story St. Mary's Hospital Surgical Pavilion, which added 300 more beds and 10 operating rooms, making St. Mary's the largest privately owned hospital in the United States. It is now known as the Joseph Building, and I confess to the sin of pride in telling you this. The pavilion was dedicated on May 12th, 1922. What a beautiful day that was. So many people arrived to tour our new facility, we had to call on the Rochester police to direct traffic. We sold tickets for 25 cents a piece, and we raised, I am pleased to say, close to $1,000 to benefit the Child Welfare Association. And at the banquet that evening, we welcomed not only the bishop and the mayor and other civic dignitaries, but also, of course, the many Mayo physicians, without whose support none of this would have been possible. I have collected some of their remarks from that evening, if you will permit me. Here. Dr. Henry Plummer said that, quote, "Only someone of great genius and great faith would dare to double the size of this already great hospital." Oh dear, I didn't mean to read that. I'm sorry. Here. The Sisters of St. Francis did all this. Yes, it most assuredly was the Sisters. Here. Here, Dr. Will. "The building is not the only necessary thing. A building is composed of brick and mortar, so to speak, but it is the ideals and the spirit that the building shelters that make the building great. What we accomplish in the future will not be due to the brick and mortar, but to the soul and spirit that reside within St. Mary's Hospital." Isn't that marvelous? The soul and spirit, the collaboration, the teamwork. These are what make our efforts so worth doing, always and always. After all, hospitals exist entirely for their patients, as if there should ever be any discussion on this point. You know, we must always provide for our patients better than the best home can do. In justice, we owe them intelligent, scientific, efficient service, and must be prepared to make sacrifices for their comfort and health. Hospitals should not be boarding houses. I'm sure you agree. Now, I recall that they asked me to speak that evening, and I tried to decline, not deserving their praise. But at their insistence, I told them I would take their plaudits to distribute among the sisters, which I have done. Yes, so many blessings over the years. One such was the opportunity to meet President Franklin D. Roosevelt when he came to Rochester to honor the Mayo brothers. August 8, 1934. Oh, I remember it so well. I was able to greet the president as he sat in his car, not realizing at the time, well, none of us knew about the disabling polio that he hid so very well. Oh, such bravery is among us at every turn. And I have been blessed the last few years by the presence of the immensely capable Sister Domitella, which gives me a little more time to visit the sick and poor. Oh, Oh, and my niece and I love to go for rides in the enormous Packard that the Mayos kindly gave to the sisters. Sister Blaze drives perhaps a little wildly, but oh, it is such fun. I always sit in the front seat, so I have a good view of the crops as we whiz past. But I shall stop now, and I apologize for any prideful things I have said. I trust you know, from the bottom of your hearts, that it is the spirit of intimacy between the nursing service and the medical staff that have made St. Mary's the eminent medical center that it is. And now, I must return to my day, which starts early and lasts long, and that is entirely as it should be. May God bless you all. I deliver you now to the skillful hands of Dr. Gertrude Booker Granger. My turn. Oh, good. I have a couple minutes before my next patient. Yes, I am Dr. Gertrude Booker Granger. I came here in '98 to assist Dr. Charlie in ophthalmology, the first woman physician to be hired by the Mayos. I was 26, a baby, but it was a golden opportunity, and I knew it. Now I have my own clinical practice, where I do the usual eye exams and refractions, along with more complicated cases like congenital cataracts, detached retinas, blurred vision due to luz, our euphemism for syphilis, and so on. It keeps me busy. I have recently become Rochester Deputy Director of Public Health, again working alongside Dr. Charlie. And we have a number of programs mapped out already, such as a new system for collecting garbage. Now, this is a brilliant idea. Instead of allowing garbage to accumulate in our city alleys, as it has done from time immemorial, we will recycle it by feeding it to the hogs on Dr. Charlie's farm. And I'm serious. This is productive recycling at its best. We're also working on an ordinance to require milk inspection and pasteurization. Maybe we can get the rates of tuberculosis to come down. I hope so. It's at least a step in the right direction. Oh, dear. Well, I can't go without saying something about a topic very dear to my heart, and that is how exceedingly difficult it has been for women to enter the ranks of physicians in this country. Now, I was fortunate in that the door was open more easily for me because of the massive efforts of one Dr. Harriet Preston. And if I ever had a hero other than the Brothers Mayo, it's Dr. Preston. She began medical practice in Rochester in 1868. Now, think of that. Will Mayo was 5. Charlie was 3, born 3 months after the end of the Civil War. And Harriet Preston was practicing medicine in boarding houses and in a room over the drugstore, but she could not be admitted to the State Medical Society because she was a woman. The elder Dr. Mayo spoke in support of her membership, and what a furor erupted. Oh, whoa, no heresy. What happened to respect for female delicacy? Women should stay in their own sphere as wife and mother. They'll just start practicing anyway once they get married, and so on and so on. You know how it goes. These views of women's limitations, of course, are hardly confined to the medical profession, but that doesn't make them any less heinous. The point is, it took nearly a decade for the AMA and State Medical Society to allow Harriet Preston to become a member. to decide, in other words, that women could be viewed as colleagues and not as interlopers. And now, just look at the number of women physicians who have joined the staff at Mayo Clinic. These are my colleagues and friends. Dr. Isabella Herb, a celebrated anesthetist and pathologist. Dr. Lita Stacy, who introduced the use of radium for treating tumors. Dr. Della Drips, a prominent physician in women's medicine. Dr. Georgine Luden, a renowned force in cancer research. Dr. Winifred Ashby, an internationally famous researcher in immunology. There are more, and there will be more as educational opportunities and cultural attitudes continue to evolve. In the meantime, I count it the highest of honors to be here at Mayo Clinic, where every single day we all work together for the needs of the patients. It's such a profoundly simple idea, isn't it? But I'm sorry, I really do need to go. If you have other questions, you might ask Nora Guthrie. She's one of Mayo's heroines from the Great War, and she now keeps us all organized as Dr. Will's secretary. What would we do without Nora? Thank you, Doctor. It's true that when I first started in Rochester, I never imagined I'd end up 2 years later close to the front lines in France. Well, I worked in the editorial department under Maud Mellish, and that may have helped prepare me for hardship duty. I'm only joking, of course. She's a superb editor. Now, you may know the background here. Mayo Clinic and the University of Minnesota and the Red Cross and some private citizens organized Base Hospital 26. It was one of 50 unit hospitals ready to be deployed if needed. Well, ours was deployed, and I could not wait to go. What an adventure for a young second-grade teacher from Sioux Falls with no previous medical training. And we shipped out in the spring of 18 for Allery, France, about 50 miles from the front lines. There were lots of us there, medical officers and nurses, enlisted men, pharmacists, clerical staff, and so on. But really, everyone helped out with everything. And I remember when we first got there, almost nothing was ready for us. And so we just had to improvise with whatever materials we had on hand to make tables and chairs and sterilizers, bathing slabs, whatever we needed to care for the men. And after only 2 weeks, when the first train of wounded soldiers arrived, we were able to evacuate that convoy in 43 seconds. And we were told later that was a record. We had 2,000 beds that were nearly always full. They were crammed together, barely a foot apart. We had up to 3 trains of wounded soldiers arriving every night. We had inadequate, to say the least, heating and ventilation. We had all sorts of infectious diseases, along with the horrible war injuries. We needed every ounce of courage and energy we could muster. But we certainly had all the best will and enthusiasm in the world, and the best doctors and the best nurses. Our Mayo-trained nurses were in especially high demand for the mobile units, the ones that went straight to the front line. I'm thinking particularly of Florence Bullard, who graduated from St. Mary's in 13, I think it was. She was a Red Cross nurse, and she was awarded the Croix de Guerre and Bronze Star, the first American woman to be recognized by the French government for bravery. Imagine. All sorts of wonderful things were said about her. And one of our boys even wrote a poem about the war that he dedicated to her, to Florence Bullard, with tremendous admiration for her as a soldier and woman. It's a beautiful poem about how peace, like a snow, has feathered down and sighed. And these hearts that died have taken wing for vaster skies. And it breaks your heart. So I got home safe and sound, and now I am Dr. Will's secretary, so I handle his truly vast correspondence and manage his calendar, and a kinder, more respectful colleague than he I cannot imagine. But this also means that I have daily contact with many of our peerless women. For example, Mabel Root, who was largely responsible with Dr. Plummer for establishing our medical record system and surgical index, the cornerstones of a group practice. Mary Foley, our dietitian, whose Rochester Diet Kitchen is the first of its kind in the nation, was emulated around the world. Eleanor Fry, our medical illustrator, this is one of her drawings. Oh, the precision and artistry are breathtaking, aren't they? Ulcers and tonsillectomies never looked so good. Nellie Starkson, she creates anatomical sculptures to show at exhibitions. She's the only woman in the country doing this work, and just think, she's ours. Oh, Sophia Tonberg-Hoganson, Mayo's first janitress, the courage of this woman. She has suffered one personal tragedy after another, and still she has managed to raise her 7 children, mostly by herself, to have absolute respect for education and hard work. She teaches us all every day. And these and more are the women that I am proud to call my compatriots. Now, please excuse me, I do need to go. Dr. Will is away for the week and I'm on the run. I leave you, though, in the capable hands of Charlotte Bundy, our sterling social worker. Thanks, Nora. Oh, I'm the one on the left hugging my knees. Gosh, we don't look very happy, do we? We were, I promise you. We were probably just having to miss lunch for have some old photo taken. I guess I would say that the idea of social work in medicine didn't really take a hold at Mayo until we started getting patients of different nationalities and religions from areas outside our own. Dr. Will knew that social work was fairly well established on the East Coast. Of course, he never lets a good new idea escape his attention. So the very first thing we did was to ask the patients what they really needed. And right away, we found that 51% of patients come here without a family member to support them. And think how lonely that would be. So we developed 2 main initiatives. One was recreational group work to help raise the patient's morale, and the other was casework to help the doctors give them the best medical service possible. It seems so obvious now, doesn't it? But even such basic assumptions were fairly radical just a couple of years ago. In my first 5 years here, we added to the payroll 7 caseworkers, 2 secretaries, a librarian, and 2 occupational therapists. I wonder if our business manager, Harry Harwick, knew what he was getting into. Well, what I love most about my work, no surprise, is connecting with the patients. Oh, such wonderful stories. Like the Danish woman from Iowa who arrived here by herself, and she was so desperately homesick that she said she'd rather go home and die than wait for her treatment to start. So I found some Danish books for her and located a Danish couple who visited her regularly and talked with her in her own language, simple things. And she ended up staying, and her treatment went very well. Oh, and the 12-year-old girl, who arrived at Mayo on the train, all the way from Montana, with this note pinned to her dress that said, "Please be good to this little girl. She is going to the Mayo Clinic." And there was a little 9-year-old girl from a poor farm family who loved to ride around with me in my Model T, delivering books and visiting with people. Oh, how we laughed, she and I. Oh, so wonderful, wonderful. And since patients are always our priority, we hired Juliet Eisendrath. She's the one standing in the second row on the right. And she helps with our Jewish patients, many of whom are either Orthodox or speak only Yiddish. Well, for that matter now, we're starting to get calls for interpreters in Spanish, and Polish, French, Italian, let me think, Greek, Finnish. Our little clinic extends well beyond Rochester, Minnesota, USA. So in the short of it is that right from the start we had our hands full, and especially as social workers came to be seen as the long arm of the physicians. And now there's this whole group of us in our unit, and we feel a lot like a family. Now, I truly cannot imagine a richer, happier experience for a group of mostly young women wanting to serve their communities. And this family atmosphere of warmth and generosity comes right down from the very top. That's how it always happens, isn't it? From Dr. Will, Dr. Charlie, and from this whole incomparable clinic here on the prairie. How did that happen? Well, you know who could tell us? I believe we've come full circle. I believe we are back to Edith Graham Mayo, who, if we're very lucky, may tell us a little more of her story. Oh, heavens, I'm so uncomfortable talking about myself, but in the spirit of sharing our women's stories, of course I will join in. Well, certainly I owe a great debt of thanks to my mother, Jane Twentyman Graham, who was one of those astonishingly brave women who homesteaded in the early years of the Minnesota Territory, and who taught each of her 13 children the importance of education and of, how shall I say, of conveying a spirit of deeply felt sympathy to others. Well, her pioneer spirit expressed itself in me early on. When I was 13, I wrote an essay titled Women's Rights. I recall every word of it still, ungrammatical as it is. Now, I said, first of all, women have as good a right to vote as men. And the idea of a woman not knowing enough to hold office? Oh, where you see one smart man, you see a dozen smart women.
And to hear a man say a woman don't know enough to hold office when he is scarcely a fool himself is ridiculous. So follow my lead, girls, and we will soon vote and hold office and be president and serve in Congress. Signed, EMG Esquire.
I hope I soon learn to be slightly more diplomatic. And of course, it was to be another 40 years before my optimism about the vote bore fruit. But the seed of my utmost belief in women's potential and capability has never left me. So, the elder Dr. Mayo hired me right out of nursing school to administer anesthesia for him, and I taught nursing, such as I knew, to the Sisters of St. Francis. Sister Joseph was one of my first students. Imagine, I was 22. And I loved riding horses, and so Dr. Mayo would sometimes send me galloping into the countryside to check on some patient there. And don't tell anyone, but when no one was looking, I rode astride. Side saddle is for girls. But you know how it is with love. I met and married my dear Charlie, and my life changed. We raised our family here in Rochester with all the joys and sorrows that implies. And our various homes were filled to the brim with music and dancing, family and friends. But I have also counted it the highest of honors to work closely with our community. And in light of that, I have helped organize the YMCA and the Civic League here in Rochester. And I must say that we of the League were and are true activists. For example, if you will permit me, we built the first public restroom for women and children only, the first in the nation. We hired visiting nurses and a health inspector before such public programs existed. We worked closely with Dr. Charlie to contain the scarlet fever epidemic of 1912. We advocated for the first woman member of the school board, for the first policewoman, for a clinic, dental clinic, for children, and so on and on. The fundamental truth is, as we all know, that everything good that happens in a community happens because the community itself pulls together with the welfare of all its members as its clear priority. And this, of course, is the same principle that has guided Mayo Clinic all these years. But at any rate, that is more than enough about me. I only count myself happy to have been allied with the extraordinary women and men of the Mayo community. I am filled with gratitude for the blessings of my children and grandchildren, and for my dear husband. And I look forward, for as long as I'm able, to hearing all the news from the clinic, which will, I'm absolutely certain, include glowing reports of the accomplishments of more and more superb women. Why should it be otherwise? We remember and we honor.